Now, Michael Jackson, one of the most widely beloved entertainers and profoundly influential artists of all time, certainly if his record sales are anything to go by, leaves an indelible imprint on popular music and culture. His life was dogged by gossip of strange lifestyle habits, allegations of abuse, and most recently, of course, by news that he had lost his fortune and was forced to sell personal memorabilia. But who was the real Michael Jackson? Well, Dr. Patrick Treacy, cosmetic surgeon, was a friend, had become a friend of Jackson's after the star became one of his clients. Patrick, of course, is an old friend of the programme. Good morning, Patrick. You're very welcome.
Good morning,
Now, I understand you've got a careful line to walk here, because even though the man is dead, he was a client and there is confidentiality and privilege and all the rest of it. But the man, I mean, there's so much rubbish been written about him, Patrick. It's very hard to know what's myth and what's true. And, you know, sometimes you even wondered whether he was real. But he was a real human being. So,
Absolutely.
As a human being, what was he like in your experience?
Well, over a period of time, I got to know Michael, and I must say that I found him to be an absolutely wonderful and honest person. I knew him at the level of sort of staying in his house to an extent as well.
So you've been in Neverland?
Not in Neverland. This is when he was in Ireland mostly.
All right, okay.
You know, yeah, when he was sort of down in Cross Manor. And I suppose the first thing is that the case against him regarding the kids, I would, after having listened to his side of the story, find it very, very hard to believe. During that period also, at the same time as the Murray children here were petrol bombed in the gangland war that was going on in Limerick,
yeah.
And he wanted to go into Crumlin Hospital to see the children, and he wanted me to go in, which I did do, and sort of give him an update. So he was very, very genuinely interested in children from a loving point of view. And his own kids, he got on really well with them. They really loved him as well, and, you know, sort of the way they responded to him was more so than I've seen in any sort of, you know, father-son relationship. When I say father-daughter there, it's very interesting. I was in Michael's house, you know, one day, and two of the kids had fallen asleep, and we both brought them upstairs to their bedroom. And at that stage, Blanket was quite young and with long flowing hair. And he was ahead of me in the stairs.
Did he call her Blanket as well?
He did, yes. Well, and the funny thing is that I turned around and I said, "She's a beautiful child, isn't he?" And he turned around and he said, "Patrick, she is a he," you know. So it was quite interesting, yeah.
No, I can't ask you obviously about your relationship with him in terms of what he was attending you for. But
of course, as a boy, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you have been quite outspoken in terms of plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, and people with body dysmorphia being indulged in that. And as a medical practitioner, I would have thought that if you got into a room with Michael Jackson, you would have said, "Michael, you really need to stop doing this to yourself." Am I wrong? Or can you tell me?
No, I would prefer not to go into the sort of the medical aspects, you know.
Well, I mean, you've said it here on this programme that, you know...
absolutely, regarding regulation and all the rest. But it's funny, often sort of, you know, when we chat about things like humanitarianism. He had a great love of Africa for HIV there. He was a major contributory on the side to many, many charities. And one day that he was in Aylesbury, he turned around and he says, "I have somebody to talk to you on the telephone." And I turned around and he says, "It's Mandiba." I was like, "Mandiba? Grandfather," you know? I turned around, it was Nelson Mandela. The three of us had a chat, you know. So the whole other side of Michael, you know, he was such a...
What was his, in as much as you can judge and in as much as you can say, what was his mental state? Because the reports are that the abuse case in California effectively left him devastated emotionally.
He certainly became very paranoid of the media after that period. And I know he had said things to me like, "Patrick, one thing I don't want is to be another poorless black man when I die, you know, being ripped off by white, you know, sort of managers." And he had always this fear of that. And I mean, he mentioned, you know, sort of many of his friends, you know, sort of who we would know who'd have died, you know, sort of in the previous 20 to 30 years that would have been black musical artists that had sort of died penniless. So he certainly had a fear of that. Michael was very humorous, very comical, very intelligent, and, you know, you'd be looking through a book and you'd be looking at maybe a bird in a book, and he would turn around and say, "Oh, that's Lepidoptera genera," or something, you know. He had a deep interest in things medical as well. I must say one or two of my medical texts were missing afterwards.
Well, yes. How much of what the world saw or perceived of him was he in control of? How much of it did he manipulate, do you think? How much of it did he create?
It's difficult to know. I know in the sort of later years he did shun the media, but there is certainly anecdotal evidence that some of the things in his earlier period that he had would release things to the press and then probably was sorry that he did that. I think the press gave him a very, very hard time, and unfortunately a very, very hard time, maybe for the wrong reasons. When we look at even the incidents in Berlin, where he held his child out, who was Blanket at the time after Blanket was born, and brought back in, I mean, it wasn't so much of an incident, so much that it was relayed around the world within 2 hours. It was in something like 160 countries. It was, in terms of a PR exercise, but probably if Arnold Schwarzenegger would have done it, you know, they would turn around and say, oh, what a big, strong man with a, you know, sort of a child. It was only because everybody had this persona of Michael that thought that he was going to, you know, sort of drop his kid over the balcony or something. And why would he do that, you know?
I know. It's not unusual that a 50-year-old man will die of a heart attack, and there will be questions about that. We'll have to wait and see about the post-mortem. There have been reports that he was very frail. I mean, as a medical practitioner, when you saw him in Ireland, which is not that long ago, did he look physically okay to you? Did he look in good shape, or would you have had worries about him?
I don't think there was any sort of suspicion of a cardiac
problem at that stage.
Yeah. Obviously, with the sort of London concert coming up, he had been under a lot of stress that would have done...
well, he was struggling to make rehearsals. People were saying that he was finding it physically difficult.
Absolutely. Of course, there is the anecdotal suggestions as well that Michael had a problem with certain medications, you know, and this could have been contributory. I certainly wouldn't like to preempt or
well, it was admitted he was very badly burned during the making of a Pepsi ad, and apparently he had suffered fairly horrific skin burns, and he was on serious painkillers, which he had a problem with, and which he went to rehab to sort out. There are stories that maybe he hadn't fully sorted that out. Well, we won't know. Very quickly before you go, Patrick, you know, there will be a huge amount of stuff written about the man by people who never met him and didn't know him.
Sure.
So if you'd like to kind of give a final word from somebody who didn't meet him and did know him, what would you say about him? What did he mean to you, and what was his legacy?
Certainly, I think he was misinterpreted by the media. I don't think that he was guilty of any of the things in California. At the time myself, I mean, I must say that I would have swung 50-50 either way, but when I listened to his side of the story, and he had no reason to tell me anything, but we often, you know, sort of, we sat, you know, sort of in a van together for hours, you know, sort of chatting at one stage, and I would think that of all his actions, I would have thought that he was a loving person, that certainly the world didn't get to know well enough during his brief sort of period here. And I think that you'll probably find now he'll become a totally iconic figure, the same way as Elvis Presley did in his sort of period. And
well, you see, when all the gossip and all the rubbish is all gone and it's wrapped around our fish and chips, there'll still be that wonderful body of music. You know,
absolutely.
And that will last longer than any of us and any of the tittle-tattle. Patrick, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.